The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Carla Thomas, NMD with the Juice Plus company in Australia, and I'm here to welcome you tonight to our second part of the two-part series of The Art of Success with the amazing Gordon Hester. I am hoping that most of you have all listened to the webinar from last week, the part one, whether you were on live or listened to the recording. I highly suggest you do, because this is going to be continuing on from that, so it would make much more sense. Just a quick overview again to introduce Gordon if you were not on it last week. So Gordon is basically a huge wealth of knowledge to this company, having been Jeff Roberti's businessman and consultant and expert advisor over the last 20 years. Jeff Roberti is the #1 earner in Juice Plus and has been now for over 20 years. Basically, the whole part of this webinar series was for Gordon to be able to show us how misunderstood business models in the world, particularly direct selling industry, is. So he's been discussing the facts about it, and last week was really about giving us a great history into how direct selling has gotten to where it is today and where it's going. And tonight is really going to be showing us what lays ahead. So I'm really excited to be able to continue on. I know he left us hanging, just so eager to know more after last week. So I'm not going to harp on too much. I'm going to introduce the man himself and let him get going on showing us the mastery of the journey to success in the Juice Plus business. So Gordon, welcome and thank you.
Carla, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thanks for everybody tuning in. I really enjoyed getting to share a little bit of the research last week, and I think the big takeaway, if you happen to listen or listen to the replay, if not, maybe you'll get a chance to, is that we're part of a pretty magical industry. One that's making a global difference, that is really needed around the world, and I believe it's going to continue to grow. So this week, it's about, that being the fact, how do we make this work? How do we master this journey in the Juice Plus business to success? And what I elected to do was to kind of put this into a narrative, because I thought it might be easier to understand. Everybody knows about Mount Everest. And so many people talk about their goals to climb Mount Everest and how important this is. It's something big. It's a great metaphor. It gives me a chance to talk kind of about the base camps, the different levels of this, what we have to pay attention to at these levels, sort of the challenges and obstacles and the thinking that we're going to have to achieve here in order to ultimately reach the summit. Now you'll notice the levels are pretty easy: joiners, customers. Then I went into the different income breakdowns, the part-time income group and the full-time income group, and then there's this much bigger journey called abundance. I debated a lot about using the word abundance, but honestly I felt the word financial freedom was a bit confusing. For most people it means you sort of have enough money to do anything you want and have all the happiness you want, but I don't believe money is wealth. I believe it's a tool, it's a magnifier, it sort of makes you more of who you already are. And I find actually it's very rare for people to truly achieve financial freedom, that ability to live off of their assets, although we have some people that have amazing lives in some form of financial independence. Not an uncommon thing. If you look at wealth, it's defined so many different ways. With Kiyosaki, it's about time. With Tony Robbins, it's about kind of distinguishing between financial freedom and financial independence. And for him, the path of wealth, it's about turning expectations into abundance. It's about a mindset. I tend to agree. For me, freedom, which is really what drives the whole process, is about getting away from what makes you suffer. And wealth is really about having the resources to be able to do that, plus the mastery of some things that matter, happiness, your mental state, your physical state, your emotional state, your spiritual state. These things become really important. So before I get into the journey, I have to take a little bit of time and talk about, I call it Human Behavior 101. We have to talk about some really important aspects of how people work. Now, why is that important for this talk? It's important for one major reason. All business is about people. If you look at our business, it's not only about you and who you're becoming and what you're doing and where your goals are and your whys and your journey, but it's also helping a lot of other people do that, and also in the context of that, serving an entire customer base. So all business is about people. So we have to know how people are driven and how they think. And really this comes down to understanding one of two things, either mindset or mechanics. You know, the mindset is the psychology of success. Mechanics is the integration of thinking. You know, it's about systems and strategies. And so often in trainings, especially the how-to trainings, we get into the mechanics game. And, you know, we talk a lot about strategies and how-tos, and they have a lot of value. But I will tell you that I believe the more important path is to study mindset and to literally learn how to program your mind for ultimate success and ultimate abundance. And that's what this call is going to be about. I was kind of joking around with Carla and Celine before the call. I wish I would have had a couple hours, or I'm sorry, a couple days with everybody to spend talking about not only the mindset of success that we're going to cover at these different levels, these different base camps on our climb to the summit, but more important, kind of the integration of these. And maybe at some point in the future, we'll have that opportunity. So we're going to focus on mindset. I believe it's the more important of the two. Kind of a great example of this is I had one of the large leaders over here, 100 Club leader, named Terry Luongo. She sent me, it's been about 2 years ago, this wonderful training she did on customer engagement and, you know, customer retention and the power of a customer. And, you know, she was like, so what do you think about this? And I said, well, I think, unfortunately, that it's an incredible tool. The mechanics of what you're talking about are great. But ultimately, if people don't have a mindset where they value a customer, then it really doesn't matter what you teach them. You know, it kind of goes back to some of the things in the mission-driven model. You know, one of the components of that is, you know, to know your customer. You know, I don't really care what system you use and what strategies. I will tell you, the more that defines you, the more power it's going to be in your business. So I understand the power of mindset is greater. What I find is when people get too heavy on mechanics, what it creates is a bit of chaos. And especially if they're getting different mechanics, different strategies from different people, different systems and processes. And we know that for there to be duplication, simplicity really matters. And, you know, you build simplicity around principles and fundamentals, you know, core principles and fundamentals. This is a big key to reaching independence. You know, keep our business simple so it's duplicatable. So with that part, let me get into a little bit about mindset. For me, mindset is about two things. You know, we're talking now about the programming of the mind. The first is standards. So when I talk about standards, to me, they're the most important of the two. They really determine in life the level that you're going to play at. And they're a big key to sort of overcoming like obstacles and fears. For me, there's three that I really focus on. One is abundance, you know, and what do I want abundance in? I want it in wealth. I want it in happiness. I want it in certainty and fun and purpose and contribution, love and relationship and growth. I want abundance in everything, and I set myself up with that mindset because that mindset is really important for me to continue the game, to not be stopped by an obstacle or problem, and to really reach beyond what I can even dream. You know, the other one for me is excellence, you know, being my best. This is, to me, the growth component of standards. You know, I heard somebody once, as an athlete, and he was talking about this concept, and he said something that was profound to me. You'll never achieve excellence, but you have to fall in love with the process. And I think that's an important standard to have, to fall in love with the process of being your best and understanding that you can always be better, and that excellence is something you don't achieve. It's something you aspire to be in life. The third one for me is service. You know, that ultimately you have to look at your life and understand the higher you define your life by the service of others, the more potential and power you have to make a difference in the world, the greater life seems to expand and reward you. So I'm a big proponent of this. Probably the kind of good example of this, I recently watched a story on 60 Minutes, which is a really popular show here, and it was on the Giving Pledge. And the Giving Pledge was all these billionaires that basically Warren Buffett and the Gates family had started, and the idea was you get to be part of this exclusive billionaire club if you're willing to give over half of your wealth to serving society. And now they had almost 200 billionaires that were part of this. And kind of the funny part of it was, Warren Buffett got on there and they said, well, do you have people that don't get on it? And he said, yeah, we do. And I feel like I need to write a book for them, like how to live on $500 million, and kind of made a joke about it. But it made me realize every time I talk to somebody, every time I listen to somebody that has abundance, this massive wealth is making a difference in the world, and both these are sort of beyond what I can even comprehend at this point. This concept of service defines their thinking. It is the core of what they do. And then, of course, the second part is limiting beliefs. Our beliefs are really about the conclusions we make. Kind of a simple way to understand it is we live life, and we have things and we have experiences, and from those we make conclusions, and they become the programming of our brain. What limiting beliefs are to me is just bad programming. Having the wrong conclusions drive your thinking. And so much of my coaching evolves around this, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a while. But ultimately, let's look a little bit deeper. So this is what the model I use in coaching when it comes to standards. And it's really simple that whatever you set as a standard, you're always one behind in results. So when I asked somebody, I did this in Branson, I asked a complete group of people, the customer experience is the foundation of all business, according to all these people that seem to have businesses that I couldn't even dream possible of having. So tell me where your customer service is. And I asked the room, how many is it good? And I would say about 3/4 of the room raised their hand. And by the way, this is the fastest growing team we have in the U.S. So how many are great? And a great percentage of the ones that hadn't raised their hands. How many are outstanding? And maybe 1 or 2 hands went up. And then when I kind of went back and I said, let me explain what those words mean to you in terms of results. And I explained to them something really important to understand about standards. Your standards of abundance, your standards of excellence, your standards of service, they don't need to be good, great, or outstanding. They need to be part of who you are. They need to be part of your identity. If this is what defines you, this is where abundance is created in everything in life, and it's certainly the key to abundance in our business. So I encourage you to take a look at the standards you have in your business, whether it's your work ethic, whether it's your desire to grow, whether it's your excellence to serve others, whatever it might be, and ask yourself, how do I raise my game? How do I raise my standards? Because I know if I raise my standards, ultimately I can change everything in my life. And then I want to just point one other thing out about standards, and that's the focus of these matters. Kind of ultimately what I tell people is that, standards can be focused anyway. Listen, I can be excellent at being a bank robber. I can study and kind of be the best bank robber in the world, but at the end of the day, what am I really serving? And ultimately, the focus of all of our standards either comes to self or the service of others. And what I've learned from years of studying people and certainly my own life is the key is to focus your standards on the service of others. And in the service of others, this is when everything for self becomes possible. I do not believe there is such a thing as wealth without the service of others. I don't believe there's such a thing as happiness without the service of others. So it's really important for you to always think, how do I raise my standards, and ultimately, how do I serve not only yourself, your family, your team, your business, our industry, but even society? How do I define my life by this? And if you go this route, it just creates amazing results. If we're talking about limiting beliefs, I got to start with just giving you like neuroscience 101, because within this diagram is an explanation on how to fix every limiting belief you have. So what our brain does is really simple. It focuses. As I said earlier, we have experiences, and every day we focus on something. You're having one right now. A lot of you probably have never heard some of this stuff. Some of you might not have heard me. But what I'm saying and what you're looking at is capturing your focus. And as you have a focus, your brain takes this in, and it tries to see, do I know what to do with this? Is this something that I've seen in the past? Is there a belief system or an experience I have around this, or is this something new that I have to figure out? And this ability for our brain to take in new programming is what makes our brain unique to any other species in the world. And in neuroscience, they call it neuroplasticity, the ability to reprogram. And then ultimately, when we give focus to something and our brain interprets something, really what it's doing is giving it meaning. And that meaning is your belief system. And ultimately, everything that you have programmed in terms of belief controls your decisions and your actions. So it becomes really important. So I always tell people that, ultimately, if I want to change my beliefs, my limiting beliefs, first of all, I have to recognize them. But what do I have to do? Either change my focus or change the meaning that I give to something. So at all times, I can have something bad coming on. Like I could be in a situation where maybe somebody's causing me problems and I'm really frustrated. And I just can change my focus by a simple question. What else can this mean? How can I learn from this? And this is where the power of questions comes in. And, I say questions are the answers. So it's really important to learn to change your focus and to be able to get it in a positive place, a place where you're in control, and a place where you can develop that psychology of success. So we're going to come back to this. Now, as we're talking about beliefs, understand that not all beliefs are equal. So if you look at this next diagram, some beliefs your brain treats differently. I won't go into the mechanics of how this works because I would probably bore most people. Sometimes I think it's a sickness that I know. But ultimately, there's two levels of beliefs. There's conscious beliefs. So these are the conclusions we make that become a part of logic and reason. And although our brain pays attention to them, it doesn't pay attention to them like it does our subconscious brain. This is the brain that's driven by habits and our core beliefs. What we know is the door to the subconscious is habits and emotions. So anything that we do over and over again, any belief that we continue to confirm, ultimately will be treated like a habit. And the same thing with emotions. If we have an experience and that experience is powerful to us and there's an emotional component to it, it changes the way our brain sees beliefs. And I tell you this because ultimately what I look to do in coaching and what's so important to do with your beliefs and when you're coaching others is to help people build better habits and to strengthen them with emotion. This subconscious, think about it, it's the autopilot of your brain. According to a study out of Duke, it controls about half of everything you do in life. So it's really important that the programming of your habits really makes a difference in how your life is going to play out. Now, saying that, there's one particular belief that will show up in everything we talk about tonight, and that belief is fear. This is kind of an evolutionary thing if you think about it. Our brain and the development of it, over 2 million years, hasn't been programmed for the things we talk about. It hasn't been programmed for joy. It hasn't been programmed for happiness. It hasn't been programmed for success. What it's been programmed for is to survive. To survive is the default mechanism of the brain. So fear is what we tend to move toward. And I will tell you, I believe it is the number one factor that stops people from being what they want in life. And, if you look at the fear, there's really two types of it. There's the real fear. If I stuck a gun in your face, that's the real fear. But the fear that stops us isn't normally that type of fear. It's programmed fear. It's the fear of failure, the fear of judgment. Kind of a good example, how many of you, when you got out of your crib, looked at the person beside you and thought, wow, I wonder what they're thinking of me. Do they think I'm too big? Do they think I'm not smiling enough? Maybe I'm crying too much. We were born with even caring about judgment of people or the fear of failing in life. These are things that are programmed in us over time, and this is really important to understand because if it was programmed in us, we go back to our chart, what do we know? It can be reprogrammed. So we know that fear doesn't have to paralyze us. Fear can actually motivate us, and fear can be something that we can use to reprogram our brain to have more abundance. I will tell you this is sort of my observations about fear, other than I know that it can be changed. I believe that fear is the greatest thief of your dreams. If you look at fear over time and people that live in that space, what ultimately happens is their life becomes sort of a tomb of regret. And I believe we all deserve better. You can't let fear stop you because it'll take away the potential of what you can do in life, and certainly not only the potential of what you can do in this business, but the potential of what you can help other people do. You look at that for most people, the need to control is that threshold for what you have to do, and ultimately you have to be able to grow beyond what you feel you have to control to break through fear. Certainty is ultimately the greatest form of fear. And you kind of look at it in our business, look at jobs and kind of opportunity. So I'll give you an example. In the U.S. right now, the latest studies that came out, about 70% of people want to have their own business. So that's their expectation, that's their dream. Statistically, less than 5% do. So why do so many people that want something not go after it? And the reason is because fear stopped them. The fear of failure, their fear about being judged, their fear about taking risk, and all these things ultimately begin to control their ability to have the life they want. And of course, this is a challenge in our industry. It's a challenge in everything. I always tell people, if you look at fear and you study your own fear, I will tell you you'll normally see a couple things. First of all, fear will always be focused on self. So if you look at what you fear, it's about how something impacts you, which means one of the paths to get out of fear is to stop focusing on self and focus on others. If your passion to serve, if your passion to make a difference in somebody's life is greater than the fears and the obstacles you have to overcome, this can give you that energy you need to be able to overcome fear. And so often the second point is, when I'm dealing with people in fear, they're focused on what they cannot control. This is a life rule. When you focus on what you cannot control, all you have is a path to suffering. And my encouragement to you, that some of you that might be thinking about fear and where your obstacles are in this, and listen, every one of us have them, me included. I'm always looking at this and looking at how to overcome the setbacks I'm having with fear, reprogramming. And I always tell myself, my goal is not to be a worrier, it's to be a warrior and to overcome all this. And remember, anything that is valuable becomes a blockage. And then the two things that usually really kind of become a part of fear are time and money. And the reason is because they're both about self. We look at our goals and how time and money affect us. And again, what's the key? Shift your focus. Make it about other things and other people. And fear will not stop you if you can find something else more important at it. And this is kind of that strategy. And ultimately, what you're looking for is a breakthrough. If you're dealing with fear, you're looking for that one moment in time where you simply decide everything is different. And kind of what I always tell people is a simple adage. Listen, if you want to take the island, you got to burn all the bridges. You got to get to that point where you get that resolve and that desire to put all this behind you, and that you're not going to let fear stop and paralyze you anymore. 4 simple tactics for fear. Feed your mind every day. New information begins to allow you to see new things, and I'm a big believer, and that's a path through overcoming fear. Strengthen your body, your emotions, and your spirit. The stronger all those things get, the more you have the ability to overcome fear. This is such a big one for me. Find role models. As Tony would tell us, proximity is power. I find so often that what controls people's lives are the kind of people they run with. There's kind of an old adage, tell me the 5 people you spend your most time with, and I'll tell you what your life looks like. And with that type of thinking, you've got to take a look at who you're running with. Are you running with people in fear? Are you running people that are chasing abundance, people that are out trying to do something that's so much bigger that you'd like to have your life look like? And if you are, then increase your influence. This is such a big part of business. I always tell people that influence is a currency of business today. And if you want to be more, get in a bigger crowd, get in a crowd that requires you to be more, and you'll find it'll have huge impact. And the final one is take massive action. I've been watching the Australian space and the 90-day game plans and all the other massive action plans that are out there. And this is so good for business because sometimes it takes that type of a concerted momentum effort to change and move beyond fear. So, kind of my final thought is learn to overcome fears and don't let them define your life, because if you can do that, anything becomes possible. So the next thing for me is engagement. So engagement to me is the foundation of our business. So I'm going to get a little bit into our business now. Engagement for me is how long can I keep a customer and how long can I keep a team member in the game. And it's also a very simple formula. It's the triumph of hope over experience. I think I've shared this with you guys before. So what we know from behavior is if people are having great experiences, then they will continue to want to do that and they'll continue to stay engaged with something. But if they're not having great experiences, they're going to rely on hope. And just think that hope is nothing more than your belief system about the future, which means I can always change it and I was always redirect it towards something else. So when I found this formula, I began to ask myself, if engagement is the foundation of our business, what matters more, hope or experience? And I would ask audience after audience this, and I probably would get more people that would lean toward hope than experience. And then I would ask the same question, if hope matters most, where did it come from? And ultimately they answered their own question. Hope comes from experience. It's a belief. It's something that we build from the experiences that we have in life. So the mastery of a business and the mastery of engagement is the mastery of experience. And to kind of just touch on that a little bit, if I'm looking at experiences, what am I really looking at doing? I'm looking at creating things that are positive, things that are meaningful to people. So I want to program them the right way, program them about our business, about our industry, about a relationship with you, with our products, with our culture. All those things become really important. We know that that programming has to create hope, so it has to create a future belief. We know that hope is a beggar, and what I mean by that is hope requires experiences to confirm it. So when we create hope in any form, whether it's around our opportunity or our product, we have to remember that confirming that is important. I always tell people in our business, there's nobody that goes on our product and nobody that signs up for our opportunity that isn't doing that because they think they're going to gain something from it. There is some future thought that if they do this, there is a win for them in this process. That's what hope looks like. Every customer you have starts with hope, and every person you have that signs a distributor starts with hope. But I will tell you, business isn't about creating hope. Business is about confirming hope. And I believe this is the challenge our industry's had over the year. We are the greatest hope marketers in the world, but ultimately, if you're going to create hope, you have to be willing to invest into the process to make it come true, to create it into a reality. And ultimately, the fifth point is that we have to magnify hope. So one last thing, and then I want to start climbing this mountain. And this is a biggie because I deal with this all the time, goals. I study a lot about goals. I've always been curious to see how they work differently with people. I kind of just, goals to me are three simple words. I don't remember where I got this from, but I thought it was brilliant, kept it really understanding. All goals start with intention. What is intention? This is your why. This is your vision. Those are all those things in your head that are all about the future, all the things that you want to be, all the things that you want to have, all the things that you want to do. And for a lot of people, for that intention to have power, they have to give it attention. So in other words, they have to do something tangible that they can look at so they can take those pictures out of their head and put them on paper or a board or on a computer. And things that look like attention are like vision boards and goals and affirmations and journaling and these kinds of things that we look at so that we can begin to study and build plans around our intentions. And then ultimately, we can dream all we want. We can have all the visions that we want. We can write down goals from now to eternity. But ultimately, activity matters. And this is a term I think I first heard from Lauren Slocum. Goya, the law of Goya, you got to get off your ass. At the end of the day, activity is where results are produced. I was recently at Business Mastery, and this is how Tony started. He started talking about his business isn't about dreaming. He is a master of execution. In other words, he has learned how to make activity work for him. And I find that ultimately, this is the key thing you have to pay attention to. When you're dealing with goals, if somebody has a dream and it isn't big enough to create activity, then you need to begin to break down that dream into something where sort of activity shows up. That what you're ultimately looking for are doers and people that not only value activity, but there's something bigger, that activity is part of who they are. These are the people that are the doers in the world. These are the people that ultimately, no matter what they do, discipline shows up. I remember having a conversation with one of the big leaders in the UK, and my question to her was about motivation. You know, she has this fast-growing team. I said, how do you keep them motivated? And she's, not my job to keep them motivated. I prefer to have self-motivated people. And if you think about what do really self-motivated people, of course they have dreams like everybody else. They have all kinds of things they do for attention steps, but ultimately what defines them is activity. They have the ability to do what's necessary to go to work. And I will tell you this as I get off of goals, I don't know how to tell you to have abundance in life and in this business unless you're willing to work, unless you're willing to commit to the activity. Everybody that I've ever heard that has become what I view as abundant, this is the foundation of who they are. They talk about hard work. They talk about how they built this mentality. They talk about how they've kept this. And ultimately, if you want to be more, you have to become more, and you have to work hard. You have to commit in the activities. So now that we hog all that, let's kind of get into their journey to the summit, you know, the journey to the abundance level of the Juice Plus business. So initially, everything starts at the bottom. And this is an industry that attracts a lot of joiners. You know, a lot of people that hear what we have to offer, that kind of buy into all the hope that we produce with our products, with our opportunity, with our culture, with our industry, with the concept of owning their own business. And here's kind of what's amazing about this group. In our industry, the latest data that came out says that 70 to 80% of our business is joiners that will never do anything, won't take the product, and won't ever get involved with the opportunity. And I found that to be an amazing statistic, that people go so far as to get excited, so far as to sign an application, to move kind of mentally forward to have their own business. They make that jump, and then they ultimately do nothing. And I will tell you, and this is good news, our business is almost the exact opposite. It is very uncommon in our business for people to join and not do something. Our worst day is people join and just become long-term customers. So we don't really have this problem, but I will tell you that this problem to me goes back to why I started my book and why I did the first presentation about the industry. I believe there's a lot of people that don't understand our industry, and you know, you kind of look at how long we've kind of invested into marketing hope, how many people have become a part of this. Kind of give you an idea, in the US, I tracked the data over 16 years. 90 million people became part of the industry, but 85 million of them left. So I think those 85 million of those people are out there talking to these joiners, you know, these people that sign up and they're excited, and all of a sudden somebody's like, oh, you're in one of those, and they don't understand our industry. They have the wrong perceptions, and because people's beliefs are not right and their perceptions are not right, then ultimately they never get started. That fear takes over. So knowing this, what's important to take away from this? That beliefs and perceptions matter, and the likeliness of with joiners is, unless there is some strong belief going in, like for instance, maybe you have an ideal customer that has been sick and they believe the Juice Plus is going to solve that, or somebody that has a high propensity for, you know, mom wanting to take care of their kids, somebody that values exercise or nutrition, that has those kinds of strong beliefs and connects to our mission and our products. These are the people that might be able to overcome the opinions of others. But I always tell people it's really important to strengthen people's beliefs and perceptions as early as you can in the game, even before they get started, because ultimately, if it isn't strong, then fear is likely to take over and begin to stop them in the game. I also recognize that a lot of people that are joiners that are kind of looking at that summit stop looking because of the amount of complexity that some of the leadership brings to our business. You know, I always tell people, if you want to duplicate simple formula, simple, fun, and easy, and I look at some of these systems that we put in place, and I kind of am thinking about one particular person that came to visit me, and she's part of a team, and she was telling me about 70% of her people that start don't do anything. and including being a customer. So she was the exact opposite of what we normally get. So I was like, well, tell me what you tell them. And she's like, well, we have a launch call, and on that launch call, we tell them the following books they have to read, and we tell them about all the different calls they need to be a part of, and how like 5 times a week they need to be on some type of a training call. And ultimately, I said, it sounds to me like you just gave them a job, and nobody wanted to sign up for a job, and there was so much complexity around what they were requiring that they got away from understanding the power of simplicity. I kind of built this thinking into the mission-driven model when I created the thinking behind it, because I thought about what's the easiest form of a duplication, and that is to do something for somebody else that you've already done for yourself. And what's easier than a transformation on our product? That was the whole concept behind living the mission and sharing that with others, that if I could get a result on our product, if I could take one simple change or transform 30 or one of the other programs along with our products, and I could feel and see a difference, and I could change, then ultimately, because I've had this experience, I can go help other people do the same. And sometimes you got to really take a look with new people and ask yourself, am I making this too complex for them? And do I need to kind of simplify this journey so that I can keep them in the game? Remember, engagement is the game we're in. And then ultimately, I find that there's a big distinction with people and leaders that understand the power of a movement. When I look at a movement, this to me is when business feels alive. This is where I see kind of the purpose behind people, what they're doing, not the tool. I don't hear about their product necessarily. I don't hear about tapes or meetings. I hear about what they're about, what they're trying to accomplish. And I believe that feeling a movement and a purpose is much more powerful than a goal. And ultimately, the people that I see that are driving movements are really having a powerful difference in getting joiners to get in the game. So I don't know if you have a movement, if there's something that defines what you're a part of. If not, this might be something you might want to consider as a strategy. So if we can get over the joiners and get people in the game, then we get into the customers. And if you've ever heard me speak, you will know that I believe that our key performance indicator is a growing customer base. At the end of the day, this is the foundation of everything. Some people might say, well, I think it might be a growing team. I agree that a growing team is important, but a distributor without a customer, we have a term for them in the analytics department. It's called an inactive distributor. It's really important to have a customer base and understand the power of this. But I will tell you, I don't believe this is something that any of you don't understand. And the reason for that is, as long as I've looked at the data, the Aussie market, to me, has always modeled the understanding of the power of the customer and the power of the customer experience, and they've done it better than anybody, and it shows up in all the data. But I think when you're looking at customers, understand that for most of the industry, less than half their business is customers. For us, it's over 80%. If you want to know why we are different than anybody in the industry, that is the difference. We are mission driven, and customers are the foundation of our business. And this matters right now because the way the world is changing, the way the regulatory environment is changing, the amount of discussion around this is a big reason why I believe the Juice Plus business and business model will become the example for where our industry is headed in the future. So we have to protect that, of course, and understand that 80% of the business is really good, and we always want to keep it there. We don't want to shrink it down to a smaller percentage. We have to understand the expectations of our customers. To me, that's understanding what they want, how they know if they're going to get it, what they expect from us, and how to communicate with them, because communication is so foundational to relationships and people, and it's never been more complex. When I talk about knowing communication, you have to know how to communicate them, and you have to know the frequency of communicating with them, because so often, if we don't understand that aspect of things, we can literally chase people off. So those 4 areas of expectations matter. You have to understand that relationship engagement is about your investment into the customer experience. I believe from all the research that I've looked at and everything I've studied about business, that the greatest retention tool you have is your investment into the customer relationship. The more you invest into that experience, the more that customer has results and the more they see possibilities. the more they want a different level of relationship, the more chance you have of recruiting them into the mission and joining your team. So that engagement is important, and the people that I know that are really, really good in this ultimately kind of define themselves by the relationships they have with their customers. I'm going to share with you just one quick story here. I had a call last week with one of the larger NMDs in Canada, and she's a 100 clubber and really successful, and her business is booming. And we got talking about customers, and she's like, Gordon, I just got to be honest with you, this whole customer thing just feels like it's my weakness, and I don't do a really good job of building kind of the systems around this, and I don't know what to do about it. And I said, well, in my opinion, you're focused on the wrong thing. What's more important, mechanics or mindset? And I got her to understand that if she begins to communicate that one of her team tenets is that we do customer experience better than anybody, and this is foundational to our team, this is foundational to our business, and she becomes the message of that standard, then the people that do have that strength and that interest will light up. They will become the ones that create the mechanics and the systems and the strategies. And what was interesting is it lit her up and it changed her thinking. And Stephen Millman, who runs Canada, had contacted me afterwards and said, well, I don't know what you said to this person, but her entire attitude about customer engagement had changed. And it had changed because I got her to understand the power of a standard and the power of raising her game. So this doesn't always have to be about mechanics. Ultimately, in business, every business I study sort of studies an ideal customer. Whether it's really a customer or distributor in our business, what do they look like? What are their motivation? What keeps them engaged? And learning to spend more time with this customer and not get off track on the customers that are not the ideal customer or the problematic customer. Sometimes you have to remember the people that are the biggest problems will be the biggest anchors around your momentum. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your business or your team is to fire a customer, fire a distributor, because they can become a cancer to so many aspects of your business and your team. Ultimately, one thing that I've picked up recently with customers is that a lot of people now have gotten away from the word customer and are moving to the word client. And I think the reason is that if you think about client, it assumes that there's an ongoing relationship. So it kind of changes the languaging of their beliefs around a word. And that word client means that I have to build a relationship. And this might be a powerful switch you want to make to start talking as your customers as clients, and to start understanding that a client is about building a relationship, not about doing a sale. Ultimately, this is the place where you have to raise your service aptitude, where you have to go back to that standards charts and say, when it comes to the customer experience, where do I fall? Am I good, great, outstanding, or does this define me? And the higher you climb, the more success you're going to have in this area, and the more you're going to model this thinking and behavior for what represents over 80% of our business. And then I want you to understand that if you lose a customer, it isn't about losing just an income stream. This income stream is the foundation of passive income. This is where we get repeat business. This is where we have relationship income. If you think about it, 80% of our checks in the bank because 80% of our customer base drives everything. We know that a satisfied customer becomes the best path to finding a possible distributor. So conversion becomes possible. This retail to recruit mentality becomes a really powerful way of keeping people in the game. We know that if we lose customers, we lose distributors, because distributors without customers ultimately are constantly running in quicksand. And they kind of come down to this analysis, and this is an important analysis to understand. There were studies done by Amway, there were studies done by the Direct Selling Association, and all of them came down to a core reason that distributors left our business. It was how they viewed the return for the time they put in the business. So they looked at their business and they're saying, I'm investing all this time and I'm not far enough ahead where it makes any sense. And if you go back to why does that occur? Because they're not building on a customer base. They might be a recruiting team, but if that recruiting team isn't creating a larger customer base, then it'll actually punish distributor engagement. And then you have to be careful not to create brand terrorists. It's kind of a term I learned a year ago, that good business is about creating brand evangelists, whether that's your brand, whether it's the brand of the Juice Plus culture, even whether it's our industry. And sometimes when we don't leave the customer with a good experience, what happens is we create brand terrorists. I kind of got into this a little bit over here this year because after Sacramento, there was a group of people that thought a good game to play with customers would be this rebate game, where they would tell customers they could get a rebate that was really a $100 bonus, and then they would sort of get them into doing referrals and then tell them, yeah, this is really about a bonus. And it really bothered me because I thought, boy, that doesn't seem very authentic. It doesn't seem to fit the way our culture works. We don't really game the system. We go kind of overboard to be trustworthy and truthful. And sometimes you don't want to play games with customers and people because ultimately they lose trust. And when they lose trust, these tend to be the people that become brand terrorists. So if we go to the next part of this, the dividing line, I just want you to understand this. There's a whole bunch of people, 80% of everybody we have involved with this culture, that is sitting at that base camp called customer saying, this is as far as I want to go. And although you're always looking for engagement, you're always looking for an opportunity to have a conversation to see if they see the mission, if there's something bigger that they can be a part of, we have to remember that historically, the ratio of customers to distributors is about 8-to-1. And I cannot tell you how many people I've seen destroy their business trying to turn every customer into a business builder. You have to honor where people are at and maybe earn a path to something better. But remember, don't push people. If we get into the part-time people, again, this is about 95% of our business. What matters here? Strengthening their core beliefs, and the standards they have. You've got to look at the beliefs and ask yourself, are you strengthening their belief about our products? Are you strengthening the belief about our industry, about our culture, about having a relationship with you and your team? Even strengthening the beliefs in themselves, because the stronger this becomes, the more you can keep them engaged in the game. There seems to be an ongoing struggle with getting people to work consistently. And we go back to the concept of, well, let's get them to get a bigger why and it'll show up. And there's certainly some validity to that because discipline is a function of what's important. But I will tell you, and I believe, having done this for a long time, it is much easier to recognize workers going in than it is trying to create one. And although if you understand the science of needs, we're always competing against other things. So if this is going to be the place where they're going to build their finances, we might be competing with their investments, with the job, and we have to be able to always win that war, because whatever we can make more important is where discipline shows up. And this is a question you should always integrate into your team. What do you have to do to make this business more important? And within that question, they begin to give you the answers of what's important to them and what can drive discipline. And then the goal is to tie the opportunity and the product to those things. And this is how we can begin to fuel discipline. Ultimately, the time return challenge that I mentioned with the Amway and the DSA studies, our business is very unique, but not different than a lot of businesses, in that when you first go in, you have to invest a lot of time and not necessarily get a big return for your time. And if you kind of have a mindset of dollars for hours, that job mentality, this becomes a challenge for a lot of people. This is the reason a lot of people disengage from the business, because they don't feel they're getting a return on their time. And it's very, very important that we let people understand our business is a business where you have to build critical mass. We have to build a number of relationships with customers, and we have to build a team. And over time investing into this, what happens is everything completely changes. Instead of time being what you're investing, all of a sudden now the return becomes greater than the time you're invested. And ultimately, the return can be so great that time doesn't even have to be part of the formula, and you can create some form of relationship income or passive income. We know that with part-time people, fear and obstacles become a big part of what they have to overcome to stay in the game. This is where you have to manage experiences. This is where personal growth can kind of come in and make a big difference with the part-time people. I don't have this on there, but I will tell you, I think one of the keys with part-time people is speed. I think the faster people go coming out of the gates, the more they tend to do well in our business. But I do want to touch on the development part. Personal development is critical to our business. It's critical to life. It's critical to every business. Kind of the adage we teach is you grow before your business grows. But I'm going to give you a word of caution. Be careful not to overwhelm people with personal development. And I go back to Jeff's story and so many people that I've coached that have tremendous speed and success in their business. They do not abandon personal development, but they do not let it compete against the focus on what drives sales. So they know with new people it's really important to get results, which means they have to do the activities that drive engagement. They have to be talking to people and sharing the product and sharing the opportunity and investing into building relationships on both the product and the opportunity side of things. And if we overwhelm them with personal development, what we often find is it competes with that. So I look at Jeff when he went into the business. There was really no personal development component of his business the first 3 years. He had a system, and it worked, and he kept people 100% focused on that. And because of that, they have huge success. And although they went through personal development, it wasn't something that he introduced into the culture initially. It is now. It's become a bigger part of things, but not initially. He needed that sales momentum to drive the process, and he always understood that experience is your best teacher. So the way to have development is to go out and solve real problems. Problems are the greatest gift you're going to have in business. And they are the things that you have to embrace. And this is where you want to have personal development, especially with the part-time people. So if you are one of those people that has worked toward full-time, first of all, congratulations, because you are the exception to the rule. You're in that 1 to 5% category. Base Camp 4, you're one step away from your climb to the summit. And I deal a lot in coaching with these people, with this group of leaders. And I want to tell you some of the things that I think are really important here. The first to me is the build versus manage. So ultimately, everybody starts their business building. And because they're constantly talking about new customers, a new team, you will see that their team is growing, so their performance bonus grows. You'll continue to see that their width is growing, and they're always building new leadership. And every leader I know that is really in production mode, this shows up. So I look at their performance bonus, and they're already past PB5, and I look at their width, and especially with the kids now, with the power of social media, it's not uncommon to see people 10 to 20 PB legs, frontline PB legs wide. This is sort of something that's really changing in our industry. But ultimately, one of the traps that full-time people get into is they fall into management mode. And I always know what it looks like, because it starts when you start telling people to do what you're not willing to do. And this is when they stop building and they start managing, and sort of other things take over their DMO. And this is a very common thing. I always tell people that leaders tend to have a shelf life, and they always shift to this. And the longer you can stay in production mode, the better. I remember when Jeff, a couple of years into the business, he was making over $200,000 a month, and he had an opportunity to either expand internationally or to stop and do what everybody else did, which was to enjoy the fruits of his work. That's a lot of money. He was in his 20s. He could have an incredible life. But he understood that if he stayed in the production game longer, if he went and build, if he went out to Canada and then he went to the UK and then he went to Germany, he could have the potential of having all those markets be under him. He could begin to build the leadership for them. And I will tell you that one decision to stay in production mode instead of drifting into management mode now represents literally tens of millions of dollars he's made in overrides, and about 60% of his entire income occurred because of that one decision. Same thing with Australia. He was one of the first ones over there building in your market, and pretty much all the teams over there are under Jeff because he was one of the first ones there. So it's important that you stay in building mode, and I always tell people management mode to me becomes a comfort zone, and my view on a comfort zone is it's just a slow death, and it just doesn't slow down the death of your business. It tends to slow down the excitement and the happiness that comes with it. The second is you've got to stay hungry. This is success principle number one. And what happens a lot of time, instead of the business driving that, lifestyle takes over. And you kind of get stuck at this level of base camp because ultimately your business is about feeding your lifestyle, not about feeding something bigger than you. And the greatest success stories I know in business all talk about working hard and staying hungry. And I think this is one of the most important concepts you can understand, that the hungrier you stay and the more you make your journey about building something bigger than you, the more you can have abundance in this business. We know that at this level of things, you do need to grow, that you have to focus more on personal development and, of course, business and leadership development. One of the areas where I'm kind of moving toward with my trainings and kind of one-day trainings starting this year is I want to actually teach more of the traditional business fundamentals. I want to teach more of the leadership fundamentals and certainly, financial management, all that are a big part of our business, but something that we don't talk a lot about. We do a lot of personal development. We do a lot about our business development and the how-tos, but I think there's bigger things there that we can teach to help people succeed. A lot of the full-time people make the mistake of getting into managerial mode instead of being an inspirational leader. Managerial mode is really simple to me to see. It's what it looks like when you have a job and a boss. It's when somebody is constantly telling you what to do, somebody that's constantly pushing you, instead of a leader that inspires you, that lives by example, that kind of customizes to what your needs are and helps you along your journey of success, whatever that path might be for you. I do not believe that you can have abundance in our business being a managerial leader. That you have to learn the game of inspiration, and it's really important. And ultimately, the last one is the difference between a business and an empire is the ability to build independent leaders. And Jeff did this with a simple program. You probably heard him talk about it: tell, show, try, do. Tell people, show them what to do, let them try it with your supervision, and once they're doing it, then you lead them on their own. We've always told people that the greatest gift we can give them is the gift of independence, the ability to succeed without us. And I will tell you that if you don't do this, dependency will eventually take your time and will eventually stop your business. And for a lot of the people that I see do this, what I see is they have a strong sort of way and trait of being part of everybody's success. They are everybody's business. They're such a strong leader that they're constantly engaged in other people's businesses, and that's okay. They add value, but ultimately, if your leaders cannot succeed without you, then that will become sort of the prison for your possibilities. So now let's look at the last part of this, abundance. So how do we get to this summit? How do we get into that less than 1%? The first is we go back to what we talked about. You got to create a movement coming out of the gate. A movement is something that has no end and will sustain itself forever. You have to stay hungry in this game. You can't let something else steal your focus. You have to continue to put the service of others over the service of self. You have to always work on increasing your value to the marketplace. That isn't just about personal growth. It is about personal growth turning into value. It's about learning to be able to help people at a greater level and achieve success at a higher level. You have to ultimately reprogram your mind for ultimate success. Raise those standards that matter. Begin to look at your limiting beliefs and change those limiting beliefs. Don't let fear and compromise be the jail for your potential. This is what the masses do. This is what separates greatness from everything else. And ultimately, you have to master the science of happiness. Happiness matters. There's so much research to determine how important this is to longevity, toward culture. Happiness is about 5 simple things. It's about staying in a positive emotional state. It's about staying engaged in something. It's about building better relationships. It's about doing something with purpose and meaning. And it's about achieving when you're doing that. If you can do those 5 things and you can build those into your business and into your culture, then abundance can continue to follow. I will tell you kind of this in closing. I believe that your resolve coming out of this is going to play a big part into your ability to climb toward the summit, because ultimately, if we look at momentum, we can change our thinking and we can change our activity, but change is hard. You know, if we want to build habits, it's 3 to 39 weeks, the average of 9 weeks. So we have to be able to commit. We have to have a resolve. We have to have that attitude that we're either going to get to the summit or you're going to find us dead on the mountaintop, but we're not coming back. You know, this is that mentality that it's going to get you through. I believe there's an economic winter coming, and it's one that we should all pay attention to. I believe that economic winter is going to be the toughest economic winter we've ever faced. I also know that the people that are prepared and positioned for it, it will be the greatest harvest of abundance that they've ever had in their life. And our industry is prepared for this. Our business is prepared and positioned for this. The question is are you? So I'll leave you with this thought. What I hope for you is that you got value from this, and that ultimately today you give depth to the person that you are and begin to pursue the journey of who you can become. I wish you guys the best, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. So Celine and Carla, I'll hand it back over to you.